So we're going to just do a quick overview and look through fixed assets today. We can get you started. If you have questions after the setup, I can work with you to set up a plan to get your fixed assets imported into the system, depending on where you have them now, and how to use fixed assets going forward. So within Dynamics GP, and you all should be able to see the screen right now, everything related to fixed assets is within the financial module. So you'll have financial first and then fixed assets below. You can always condense these using a similar hide-show type functionality to group those, the financial items together so that you can just see your fixed asset information. So the first place that we're going to start looking at fixed assets is at the company setup. So within this company setup, the key things in this window that you want to keep track of are setting up your different books, and we'll look at the book setup window. It's your corporate book. The book that you define in this window is the book that's used to create the general ledger transaction that's going to post your depreciation through monthly. Now you can set up multiple books, ACE, AMP, other tax books that you want to track for your fixed assets. But you always want to have one that's defined essentially as an internal, and that's the one that's going to do your depreciation to affect your general ledger. The next thing in this window is the ability to auto-generate the next asset ID. So this is new functionality. Before it was you always had to create your asset ID, or you could create it so that your asset ID is the same as your asset label. So if you have labels on your assets. But it was introduced that you could have the system auto-generate your next asset ID. So if you want to use that functionality going forward, you can. It won't go back and change anything historically, but going forward, it would work to auto-generate that ID number. Requiring an asset account, auto-adding book information, and then auto-formatting your user data. These are typically selections that you want to check on. Requiring the asset account is just defining in your setups that you want to have that asset account set versus just going to an expense. You do want to have an asset account, depreciation expense, and then accumulated depreciation. The auto-add book information, when we get into the setup of fixed assets, you have the account setup and then you have the book setup. So by doing the auto-add book info, the system will automatically create some of that starter information so that you don't have to key it in. And then, again, defaulting the asset label from the asset ID. So when we set up the fixed asset and you enter in your asset label, if you use those, say, imprinted metal stickers to put on your asset, you can use that asset label ID as your asset ID. Posting in detail. So this is one that you'd want to have checked initially. If you haven't used fixed assets before and you have a lot of fixed assets, it'll be a lot easier when you're first starting out and posting your depreciation entries and other entries from fixed assets into your general ledger. If you post those in detail, and the reason for that is if you do it in summary and you have, say, 500 assets, then you're going to get one summary entry for that. And if you're not balancing, it's going to be a whole lot harder to find that, find out where you're off if you're not posting in detail. So I always recommend when you're first starting out with fixed assets, as well as any other module in GP, to always post in detail as you're getting to know the system and how things are posting through so that you can see that detail in the GL. Once you're comfortable with it and you don't need to, you're familiar with the different ways to go in and research where data is, then you could turn off the posting in detail. But initially, I would always leave that marked on. Then within your purchasing options, so the right side of this window goes through how you can post payables management through to fixed assets, as well as purchase order processing through to fixed assets. And you can do that by account or by receipt line. So as an example, and I'll walk through a transaction as well on this, but you can set it up so that if you enter in a payables transaction or a purchase order transaction, based on the account that you select for that transaction, you can have the system trigger a notification in fixed assets that a transaction was entered against that account, and therefore you have a fixed asset that needs to be set up within the fixed asset module so that you're keeping track and keeping everything in balance. And then including your matching invoices and choosing to delete purchasing transactions immediately. Again, if you're just getting used to fixed assets, haven't used it a lot before, I would uncheck the delete purchasing transactions immediately and just leave them out there so you know you've got a reference you can go back and take a look at, make sure you've got everything set up. The accounts button within the company setup window does look at the different accounts that you have set up for your account group. So you're defining here the different account groups you have. So in this case, I have computer, I have furniture and fixture, machinery, equipment, and vehicles. And based on my account group of computer, I'm defining that these are the accounts that are going to be affected when I do a transaction that I've identified as being part of an asset, or rather an account group. What accounts will be used whenever I create transactions? So if I'm calculating depreciation or I'm doing retirement, these are the accounts that will be used for that particular asset. And then our user defined. So there's 15 user-defined fields here that you can use to track additional information on your fixed asset. So you have some text fields, you have dollar fields. You can set these based on whatever additional information you need to track on fixed assets. And there are a number of fields in the fixed asset window that you can also use for tracking, and we'll go through some of those. So that's the account, or rather the fixed asset company setup. The next thing that we're going to take a look at is the book class window. So the book class window is where you're grouping together not only your book IDs, but your class IDs, which then pulls in your account group. So I'm going to bring up my internal here first of all, and my computer equipment. And this is going to show me then that for this book and this class of computer equipment, I've defined that my depreciation method is going to be straight line. And if I click on the drop down here, I can see all of the options for the depreciation method. So whether it's straight line, declining balance, some of the years, remaining life, any of the acres. If it's land, there's no depreciation, declining balance. So you can choose whatever's appropriate based on what you and your auditors may have defined as needed for your asset. Then with your averaging convention, we have the different ways that you can define those averaging conventions. So whether it's half year, you can get into mid-month, mid-quarter, next year, full years, and periods. And again, you can choose these based on what your needs are for your asset. If you do a 125% declining balance, then you would change your switch over to switch, and what that'll do is for that last year, it then changes to straight line for the last year of an asset that's set with this. You also can define based on the book and class the original life years and days. If it's a luxury auto, any TEFRA information or options, and then special depreciation allowances. So within the book IDs, again, I talked about that you can have multiple books. So in this case, I've got internal. I could always also do an alternative minimum tax or AMP or federal tax. I would set up each one of those, assign them to the particular class IDs, and that then chooses your account group as well. Your class IDs and your account groups are a one-to-one relationship. The other items within setup here, your purchasing posting accounts. So this is where I talked about if you have it marked that you can trigger from your payables transactions or purchase order transactions, what account should create that entry in fixed asset. So I have defined here my 1510 account, which is my computer equipment. I can set up additional accounts as needed that I have set for my chart of account for vehicles or other types of equipment, machinery, buildings, those types of things. So to show an example of that, I'm going to go actually into purchasing and create a payables transaction. And this is just your typical payables transaction, and I'm going to call this computer 15-inch. And I'm going to choose my vendor. And put in my document number and my purchases amount, and we'll say it's $15.75. Not quite that much. And then I do want to make sure on my distributions that I've got my correct computer equipment account. I'm going to OK there, and now I'm just going to post my transaction. Now you would have your normal posting flow here if you're set that you can't transaction level post. You would add the batches you need to. If there's additional documentation that you're going to add to this transaction, you're going to do maybe a document attachment where you go into the note and you attach the receipt, or however you're doing this process. Similar process would work in purchase orders. You would go in and enter in your purchase order, make sure that your posting account is set to your, in this case, computer equipment account. You're going to do your receive and then invoice match, and at that point, then you're going to have the same notification in fixed assets that you have an asset to add. So I'm going to go ahead and post my transaction and close my window, and I'll leave my transaction posting journal, but then I'm going to cancel everything else here. So your transaction posting journal is going to show you all your information based on what you have set up. So I have my voucher number, my amounts, my document number that I've added, and then down below I have my posting account, so I can see that as well as my total. So now when I go into fixed asset, I'm going to go back into financial and into fixed assets, and I want to go into general. And now at the top, I have this purchases drop down here, and I can see then the different transactions that I have out ready to be added to fixed assets. So it knows automatically that it's a computer, and I can give it my asset ID if I want to, whatever you're using for that. Again, if you're using the label, you could put the label in there, have that match. If you want to call it something else in your asset ID, you can do that. It gives you the room to put that information in. Typically, your extended description is going to be some combination of maybe a model number or a serial number. What you want to make sure is that you're consistent in how you're using them. So if you're doing serial numbers in that extended description, to make sure that for all your assets, you're doing serial number in that extended description. And that way, when you go in and you run Smart List or you run other reports, you have consistent data from that field, and you're always looking at apples to apples. I think. So this could be a 15-inch computer, and my serial number is whatever serial number that is. In the short name, you can use that field as well. Again, whatever fits as far as a model number, you can enter that in. Master asset IDs allow you to group assets together. So it just gives you a different way to group that. So your assets may be separated out. You've got the computer, maybe you've got a desk, maybe you've got a couple more monitors, other fixed asset type items that you want to group together in a particular room. So maybe your master asset ID is going to be somebody's office. Or perhaps you want to group together your conference room. You've got your conference table and whatever you have for a TV screen and phone system, chairs around the conference table, anything along those lines that you want to track. Your master asset ID can be used to group those together for reporting purposes. Then you're going to have your types and your property types, and then your account group ID. So one thing I do want to point out with this account group ID is when you initially set up these assets and you assign this account group, when you come back into this window, this field does blank out. And that's not wrong. It's the way it was designed. And it doesn't mean that your account group's not selected. It's just when you save out of this window, it clears out, you go back in, it's just blanked out there. It's not gone, not lost. Everything will post as it needs to post. That is just a function of that particular field. Then you're going to have your acquisition date, your acquisition cost, which in this case came through from my payables transaction. Then I have my physical location ID and my location ID. So you can use these to track locations on your assets, or you can use them for other things as well. So if there's, say, cities that you want to track, maybe you have multiple locations, maybe you have multiple sites that you want to track assets at. So similar to us, we've got offices in Minneapolis and Barnesville and Fargo and Dickinson and Bismarck. So we're tracking maybe some combination of those different locations there. Again, we have our asset label ID, and that's the asset label that you've actually stuck on the asset. The structure ID, again, another essentially user-defined that you can use to track your fixed assets with. Then your custodian. This you could use if you wanted to for who's keeping track of that asset. Now, is there an office manager, say, at each one of those locations that tracks all those assets? You can put that on their list. So that way when they go run their reports, they can separate out by only the items that they need to keep track of. Manufacturer's name, if you wanted to put that in, then you can run reports based on what you have for manufacturers. The last maintenance, this is keeping track of when any work was done on that particular asset, and then the date it was added to the system. Once you've got this information filled in, then you're going to save the asset, and we're going to go right to the book. And so within the book, this is where we're defining the additional information for this asset. So again, I'm going to set this one up as internal. So your internal is the one that's going to create your GL transaction that's needed for depreciation expense, depreciation entries, retirements, those types of things that are going to be in your general ledger. You then, if you're also using the other books, then you would go back in and repeat the setup for those other books as you need to. So we have our placed in service date, our depreciated to date. So the depreciated to date is important when we're importing fixed assets from another system. So you've got your typically your fixed asset list, and again, I can work with you, or any one of the consultants can work with you as far as getting fixed assets into GP if you're not using them already. But with that depreciated to date, what we're looking at there is at what point has depreciation been run through, so that when we start using GP, what's the starting point for entering in depreciation. So we're going to have our beginning year cost, our cost basis, and then we're going to track based on these assets the year-to-date depreciation as well as life-to-date depreciation. Based on the selections that we have from the book and the class and the account group setup, we're going to automatically pull in the depreciation method and averaging convention and switch over. We'll also be able to go in and see if it's fully depreciated or not, and what our remaining days and years are, as well as their original life. So at that point, once you've got that information in, now your fixed asset is set up, and you're ready to move on and set up the next fixed asset. So once you have your fixed asset in, the next thing that you're typically going to be doing is you're running your depreciation on a monthly basis. You're running reports, maybe you're trying to do some projections, and then along with that, you get into doing things, other safe transactions within that fixed asset. So as an example, you could go in and do some retirement, or maybe you need to do an intercompany transfer. You could do that within GP. So we're going to take a look at the routines, and we're going to go in and look at the depreciation. And so I'm going to go in and depreciate. I'll do a smaller group of depreciation here. When you're doing your fixed asset depreciation, you can choose to do all of your assets. You can choose to do it by a particular book. And I am going to actually uncheck the depreciate all, and we're going to run just for, we'll just run for internal here. So you're going to choose that book that you want to run your depreciation for, and you're going to enter in your target date. So I'm going to choose my 12/31/17. And then you would hit your depreciation button. You will get a message here that depreciation of all assets will be performed. And do you want to continue? And at that point, then the GL transaction will be created. And just for the sake of time here, I'm going to cancel that. Once that depreciation has been run, that's going to go in and create your GL batch. So you would have your, underneath routines and fixed assets and GL posting, you'll have that batch that's created for your fixed asset depreciation. You'll have it by book and by period, and you can choose to restrict that based on a particular time period. And then from there, go in and process that and post that to your GL. Now you will need to go in once you post this to your GL and post the batch within your general ledger as well. So it's not going to do a post through, it's going to post to the GL, so you do need to go in and enter that in. So once you have that selected, then you're going to go in and process, and then you can post this, and your depreciation transaction will be completed for that time period. Okay, you can choose to do your depreciation, if you're going to do it monthly or you're going to do quarterly. It really depends on what your company's processes are for those assets and how you have things working with your auditors. You can go in then and actually keep track of everything within GP. The other things that you can do is you can do projection of depreciation. So if you wanted to go in and you wanted to look at, say, a particular group of assets and you wanted to project what the depreciation will be for a particular month, you can go in and run that. So if I wanted to run this for, say, 12/31/19, I could enter in that target date, select the book that I want to see that on, and then run the projection. That'll give you an estimate of what your depreciation will be based on the particular transactions that you have. And again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to run through that process here. The next section that we're going to look at is reporting and inquiries. So start first with inquiries. Within inquiries, again, just condense the financial, then you can go in and you can look at the fixed assets inquiries that are available. You can go in and do things like a book compare. You can go in and look at retirements and what assets have been retired. So if you click on the lookup and find a particular asset, you can see when that was retired and if it was fully retired or not. If you want to go in and see your purchasing transactions, you can see the transactions that are out there that need to be added to assets or that have been added to the asset. So once you've added them, then you have the information in the system as far as when that's been added. When you're confident in understanding the data within GP for your fixed assets, then you could turn on to delete those purchasing transactions right away so that you don't have this window filling up. If you like to have the information here, that's fine, but it doesn't hurt anything by leaving it here. The next thing that we're going to look at is reporting. So within fixed assets, and again, I'm going to test this, you can look at not only the activity for your fixed asset, whether it's annual activity, your fixed asset to general ledger reconciliation. You can rerun those reports and see those transactions. I don't think I have anything set up in here, but I'll just set one up quick. You can get a general idea. By not putting anything into your range, that's going to give you the whole range of assets. You can also choose to run this report in detail or in summary. And I'm going to choose to just run this to the screen. And this will show you then what you have out there as far as GL transactions and the assets that you have. So what are the transactions that they came from? What's the transaction information? And then your debits, credits, and that's for each one of these. That's your activity report. And once you save that, then that'll be set up and you can go in and use that again. You won't have to reset that. Now you do have the option, same as you do throughout GP, that once you have a report set up, if you like how this report is and you're going to use this report frequently, you can always add this to my report, and then it'll be on your home page so that you don't have to come in here and make your selections again. You can just go in and run that report from your home page. And to do that, you're just going to go back to your home page, and now I have my fixed assets to general ledger reconcile set up, and I can just click on it and it'll generate the report for me. So then within fixed assets and reports again, let's go in and take a look at the depreciation. So we can see our depreciation detail. We can see the depreciation expense for the general ledger. You could do reports by class, location, or structure. So you can really separate out and get reports based on just the data that you need, or you can get everything at one time. Again, we can do by detail or by summary. So I'll do this one in summary, and again, I'm going to change my destination just so it's into the screen rather than the printer, and then run the report. So now I can see my assets based on my classes here. I have my automobile, the cost basis, my current depreciation, year-to-date, accumulated in that book, and then my total. Yeah. Again, once you have this set up, save it to my report and put that on the whole thing. Your projection information, that's going to be based on doing the projections within the depreciation routine, the projection routine. You can also run your fixed asset inventory lists. So you could do by class, by structure. If you wanted to list by master asset ID, so again, the way that you were grouping your assets, you can do that. I'm going to run an inventory list by class and just choose the sample data. And again, we'll do this by summary. Change my destination to screen rather than printer. And then from my report. And again, I'm going to get my summary information for my inventory. Now you can run that in detail and see the breakout of all the autos that you have in the buildings, equipment, or furniture and fixture. Again, save it, then you can add that to your list. All right. Well, that is a summary overview of fixed assets. Does anyone have any questions?
I don't see any questions coming in the conversation box, but feel free to unmute yourself or ask a question there. I did have one question. Can you explain the options in the message? You have changed a depreciation sensitive field.
Okay. Yes, I can. So we are going to go back into cards and book, and I'm going to bring up an asset. And to bring up my book along with it. And when you change a depreciation sensitive field within GP, so if I change this to, say, $450, when I save this transaction, I'm going to get this message about changing a depreciation sensitive field that needs to then recalculate your depreciation values, and do you want to continue? So you're going to hit yes to this. Then the next question that you're going to get is choosing how you want to reset the information. Do you want to reset first based on the life, the year, or the recalculate? So the life is going to recalculate the depreciation from the placed in service date to the date that the asset has already been depreciated. So if there's any adjustments to that depreciation, they'll be written and create a GL transaction for you. Prior Prior year depreciation, though, is not going to be posted into the current fiscal year. Year is going to choose to depreciate from the beginning of the year forward to the date that the asset has already been depreciation. And recalculate is going to calculate a new rate of depreciation using the new cost basis. It does not make adjusting entries for you, and it'll use the new rate of depreciation going forward. I'll choose life in this case, and then it'll recalculate based on the life from the placed in service date forward. The other item that I did want to bring up, as far as year-end forms go with fixed assets, the forms, typical forms for fixed assets are the 4562 and the 4797. Now, Dynamics GP does not print those forms, but it does give you access, and you do have all the information to complete those forms within GP. However, out on the ideas page for Dynamics GP, and Sabrina can send this link out, there is a suggestion in there for the ability to print those forms, both the 4562 and the 4797. So if you're a company that really needs to have those forms and would really like to have those forms, save yourself some work at the end of the year, then you can go out and you can vote for this, and this potentially then would get added into one of the upcoming releases for Dynamic GP. Again, I'll have Sabrina send that link out to everybody who's attended this session, and you can go vote for that.
Deb, we have a question from Sarah. Can we go back to the AP transaction window?
Yes.
How or where does the system know that it is a fixed asset?
Okay. There we go. So the way that it knows is from the actual setup window. So when we go into setup and the purchasing posting account, so the first thing you have to do is in company, you're going to mark either the post PM through fixed assets or post POP. So if you choose the post PM, which is payables management, then you're going to go in and you're going to go to the purchasing posting account, and you're going to define your posting account that are going to be set up that you want the trigger to happen on. So I have set up my 1510 account here as one of my asset accounts. Once that's saved, now when I go into purchasing and I create a transaction, based on that setup, we'll call this computer 2. And you would enter your transaction just as you normally would. We'll call this one, we'll say it's 2500. In your distributions, as long as you code that expense to that purchasing account that you defined in that purchasing account setup window, and you can have as many accounts there as you need. So you wouldn't necessarily just have one computer account. You're going to have furniture accounts, you could have vehicle accounts, vehicle expenses that you want to depreciate. You have all of those set up, and any account that you have set up in there will trigger this to happen. So once I enter this transaction and I post it, now when I go into, I'll just cancel all my reports here. So now I go back into financial and I go to cards and general, and now in my drop down, here's my $2,500 computer that I now need to add to fixed asset.
Can you scan the invoice to a fixed asset screen?
You can use the document attachment and attach it that way, yes. Yep. So you could attach it here if you wanted to, using the document attachment, or you'd have it attached on the invoice, either way. Other question? Okay. Great. Well, if you have any questions or you think of any this afternoon or next week, just let me know, and I'd be happy to help you with any of those.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and I will send out this recording so you can refer to it later. But like Deb said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. And we hope to see some of you at our upcoming golf event. It is on June 25th. We'd love for you to put a team together and join us. And we have several other webinars coming up. You can find those on our website.